The entertainment world is mourning the death of legendary actress Diane Keaton.
I am not her mother. And by the way, she has just been through a very traumatic experience, so a little compassion would not be out of line, okay?
She wore hats, suits, and laughter like armor, but Diane Keaton also built a fortune in silence. When revealed, it left her family in tears. Here is the untold story. When people hear the name Diane Keaton, they immediately picture her iconic hats, the oversized suits, the playful laugh, and the unforgettable characters she brought to life on screen. She was not just another Hollywood actress. She was a rule breaker, an artist who carved her own space in an industry that constantly tried to box her in. What many people do not realize is that beyond her charm and talent, Keaton was quietly building an empire. When her time came to leave it behind, the fortune she had accumulated did not just surprise her family, it brought them to tears. Diane Keaton's beginnings were far from glamorous. Born Diane Hall in Los Angeles in 1946, she did not stumble straight into Hollywood royalty. She studied acting in New York, grinding her way through auditions and small stage roles before getting her big chance. Her Broadway role in the musical Hair opened a few doors, but her real breakthrough came when she became Woody Allen's muse. With films like Play It Again, Sam, and later the career-defining Annie Hall, she changed the game. Her performance in Annie Hall not only won her an Academy Award for Best Actress, but also redefined what a Hollywood leading lady could look and sound like. She was not polished to perfection. She was quirky, awkward, funny, and real, and audiences loved her for it. Yet Diane Keaton was never just an actress. She was observant, calculating, and very aware of how fleeting fame could be. Hollywood is brutal. Careers fade, roles dry up, and fortunes vanish if you are not careful. Keaton knew that early on. So, while she delivered unforgettable performances in front of the camera, she also worked behind the scenes to make sure her financial foundation was rock solid. People remember her for her eccentric style, her romances with men like Warren Beatty and Al Pacino, and her refusal to marry. But beneath that persona, she was quietly making some of the smartest financial moves in Hollywood. Instead of spending wildly, Keaton invested. She had an eye for real estate, particularly Spanish colonial homes and historic properties in Los Angeles. She bought them, restored them, and sold them at huge profits. This was not a side hustle. It was a second career. She became known in architectural circles as a preservationist, and even published books showcasing her love for design and restoration. While the world was focused on her movies, Keaton was transforming herself into a real estate mogul. And of course, her film career itself paid handsomely. From The Godfather trilogy to Something's Gotta Give, she commanded multi-million-dollar salaries and enjoyed residuals that kept paying long after the cameras stopped rolling. Combined with real estate, her earnings from books, publishing, and selective endorsements, Keaton built a fortune that many estimated to be over $100 million. But here is what made it so shocking. She rarely spoke about it, even with those closest to her. Her private life was always just that, private. Diane never married, but she adopted 2 children later in life. Dexter came first in 1996, followed by Duke in 2001. She raised them largely outside the Hollywood spotlight, determined to give them as normal a life as possible. Her siblings were also a huge part of her story, particularly her brother Randy, who struggled with mental illness. Diane spent years quietly supporting him, financially and emotionally, never letting him slip through the cracks. Family mattered to her deeply, but she always handled things on her own terms, and it was those terms that stunned her family when her will was finally revealed. Keaton had not just left behind piles of cash. She had created a legacy plan that was thoughtful, strategic, and emotional. For her children, she did not simply hand them millions of dollars. Instead, she gave them homes, investments, and control over projects she had started. She wanted them to be secure, but also independent. Her will was not just about inheritance. It was about teaching responsibility, even after she was gone. For her siblings, especially Randy, she made sure they were taken care of with generous trust funds. She knew the challenges they faced and put safeguards in place so that financial struggles would never haunt them. And then came the part that really shook everyone. Keaton left significant portions of her wealth to charity. She directed money toward causes she had championed throughout her life, such as mental health, historic preservation, and the arts. It was a move that revealed just how deeply personal her fortune was. She had not simply earned money. She had turned it into a reflection of her passions, her values, and her heart. The reason her family cried was not only because of the staggering amount she left behind, but because of the way she had structured it. Every detail carried meaning. Every choice reflected who Diane Keaton truly was, a woman who embraced independence, creativity, and generosity. Even in death, she was curating her legacy as carefully as she had crafted her performances. Her fortune was a reminder that she had lived her life her way. She had refused to conform in Hollywood, refused to conform in love, and refused to conform in wealth. Diane Keaton's career was more than a string of hit films. It was a story of reinvention, resilience, and independence. Her life choices were often unconventional, and so was the way she managed her money and her legacy. To truly understand why her family cried when they saw what she left behind, you have to look at the layers of her life, the contradictions she embraced, and the long-term vision she carried with her even in moments of chaos. After the massive success of Annie Hall, Diane became one of Hollywood's most sought-after actresses. Roles in The Godfather Part 2, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, Reds, and later romantic comedies like Baby Boom and Father of the Bride secured her place in the industry. She had staying power, something rare in a world where actresses were often discarded once they aged out of ingenue roles. Keaton embraced her quirks, leaned into them, and built a career that spanned decades. That career gave her not just fame, but the financial leverage to make smart choices.
I do get nervous, yeah, but I was excited about the music. I don't want to, just focus on them.
Unlike many stars of her generation, Keaton did not go down the path of excessive luxury or scandalous overspending. She lived comfortably, but she also invested. Real estate became her hidden empire. In Los Angeles, she was known for buying historic homes, restoring them with care, and selling them for massive returns. She even took part in preserving architectural history, buying homes designed by Frank Lloyd Wright's son, Lloyd Wright, and reviving them to their original glory. People often saw her as the eccentric actress in oversized suits, but within the real estate world, she was respected as a serious investor with an impeccable eye. This business sense was something her family never fully grasped until her estate was revealed. While they knew she had money, they did not realize the extent of her holdings. Keaton had accumulated not only homes, but also long-term investments that ensured her wealth would grow quietly in the background. Stocks, publishing rights, royalties, and trusts were all part of her portfolio. The quiet way she handled her finances meant that even her children were taken by surprise at the true scale of her fortune. Her family's tears were not only about the money itself, but about what that fortune represented. Diane Keaton had lived much of her life on her own terms, sometimes even keeping loved ones at a distance in order to protect her independence. Yet when she left everything behind, she showed that her family was always at the center of her heart. For her daughter Dexter and her son Duke, she left more than security. She left them opportunities. The homes, the businesses, and the rights to certain creative works were handed to them with conditions that encouraged independence and responsibility. She wanted her children to learn how to manage what she had built, not just enjoy it without effort. Her siblings were also cared for. Diane had always carried the weight of her brother Randy's struggles, quietly supporting him through his battles with mental illness. In her estate, she made sure he would be looked after, financially secure, and protected from the instability that had followed him most of his life. For her other siblings, she left generous gifts that reflected her gratitude for their place in her journey. What made her will even more emotional was the charitable side of her legacy. Keaton had long been passionate about causes related to mental health, the arts, and historic preservation. She directed large portions of her fortune to organizations that reflected those passions. Diane Keaton, who had spent years restoring old homes, advocating for creative expression, and quietly supporting her brother's health challenges, ensured that those causes would continue to benefit even after she was gone. Her family was moved by this, because it showed how deeply she had thought about not just her immediate loved ones, but also the world she wanted to leave behind. The emotional weight of her will was amplified by the fact that Diane had never sought to be flashy about her money. Unlike some Hollywood stars who flaunted their wealth, she lived with eccentric style but not wasteful extravagance. Her fashion was unique, her personality bold, but her financial habits were measured. The secrecy surrounding her wealth meant that the revelation of its true size felt overwhelming to her family. They were grieving her loss while simultaneously realizing that she had been planning for them all along in ways they had not understood. There is also the symbolism of the choices she made. By leaving her children not just money, but responsibilities, she was passing on a life lesson. By leaving her siblings security, she was reminding them that family always came first in her heart. And by leaving charities large sums, she was showing that her legacy went beyond Hollywood, beyond her films, and into the deeper parts of society she cared for. For many fans, Diane Keaton's legacy will always be tied to her characters, from the neurotic but lovable Annie Hall to the strong-willed Kay Adams in The Godfather. But for her family, her legacy was revealed in the pages of her will and the details of her estate. It was not about the money itself, but the meaning behind it. That is why they cried. They were not just inheriting wealth, they were inheriting her vision, her love, and her way of doing things. Her story is a reminder of how powerful planning and vision can be. Diane Keaton was a Hollywood icon, but she was also a woman who understood the importance of protecting her loved ones and giving back to the world. Her life was about independence, and her death proved that even independence can coexist with deep care for others. She may have lived as a single woman who never married, but her choices showed she was never truly alone. Her family and her causes were always part of her, and her final gifts reflected that. Diane Keaton's story is one that blends art, eccentricity, independence, and careful planning. To many people, she was the quirky actress who lit up the screen with her laugh, her awkward grace, and her unique sense of style. But to those who truly knew her, she was something more. She was a woman who lived deliberately, who thought about the future, and who made sure that even in death, her voice would still be heard. Her family's reaction to her estate is not simply about the staggering amount of money she left behind. It is about the meaning woven into every detail of her will. They cried not just out of grief, but out of recognition. They realized that every decision she had made, every home she restored, every dollar she saved, and every investment she placed was connected to her love for them. Diane Keaton was not a person who left anything to chance. She understood that a legacy is not just about what you achieve, but about what you leave behind for others. Throughout her life, Diane Keaton was a study in contradictions. She was bold on screen, but shy in interviews. She dressed in oversized suits that defied Hollywood norms, yet became a fashion icon. She refused to marry but adopted 2 children later in life, giving them her entire heart. She was fiercely private but revealed deeply personal truths in her memoirs. This complexity is part of what made her so captivating to audiences and so unforgettable to her family. It is also what made her estate so surprising. For years, she gave off the impression of a woman who lived simply and creatively, when in truth, she was also carefully securing a future for her loved ones. Her children, Dexter and Duke, were the center of her world. She often described motherhood as her greatest role, even greater than her Oscar-winning performances. By adopting them later in life, she brought stability and meaning to her private world. She guarded them from the spotlight, giving them room to grow outside the noise of Hollywood. And when she left her fortune behind, she made sure they would not just inherit wealth, but also values. They received properties, businesses, and responsibilities that would encourage them to be caretakers of her vision. She wanted them to know what it meant to build, to create, to preserve. In many ways, she was passing on lessons she had learned from her own parents. Diane's relationship with her mother was one of the deepest bonds in her life. Her mother, Dorothy, kept journals that chronicled family life, dreams, and struggles. Those journals later inspired Diane to write her own memoir. In them, she reflected on her family's history, her brother's challenges, and the sacrifices her parents made. That sense of family duty carried into the way she arranged her estate. The care she had for her siblings, especially Randy, was written into her financial plans. By leaving him security, she was ensuring that he would always be protected, even if she was no longer there to support him directly. The inclusion of charities in her will was another reflection of her character. Diane Keaton was not just a Hollywood actress. She was also a preservationist, an author, and a supporter of mental health initiatives. By directing portions of her wealth to causes she cared about, she was telling her family and the world that her influence did not end with her films. It extended into art, architecture, and human well-being. Her donations ensured that future generations would continue to benefit from her passions. For her family, this was deeply emotional. They saw that her generosity stretched beyond the walls of their home. It touched communities, artists, and people struggling with the same challenges her brother had faced. What also moved them was the secrecy surrounding her fortune. Diane Keaton was not someone who flaunted her wealth. She did not live in gold-plated mansions or parade luxury cars. Her style was eccentric, but not wasteful. She wore hats and suits because they expressed who she was, not because they were expensive. She lived comfortably, but never indulgently. That is why the true size of her fortune was such a shock. Her children and siblings knew she was successful, but they did not fully realize how much she had accumulated through decades of careful work. When the documents were opened and the numbers revealed, the truth washed over them like a tidal wave. Their tears were not only for her loss, but for the discovery of how much thought she had put into protecting them. Hollywood history is full of tragic stories of stars who died broke, their fortunes squandered by bad deals, reckless spending, or manipulation. Diane Keaton avoided that fate by being deliberate. She was selective with her projects, she invested wisely, and she always kept an eye on the future. This makes her legacy stand out even more. Her wealth was not luck. It was the result of discipline, vision, and resilience. Her story also challenges the idea of what it means to live a successful Hollywood life. Diane Keaton did not marry. She did not follow the conventional path of glamorous excess, and she did not chase trends. Instead, she carved her own identity and remained authentic until the end. That authenticity extended into her finances and her estate. She was honest with herself about what mattered most, and she directed her wealth accordingly. For fans, learning about Diane Keaton's fortune and her family's reaction adds another layer to the woman they admired. It shows that behind the laughter, the hats, and the charm was someone deeply thoughtful. She was not just an actress who entertained millions. She was a mother who protected her children, a sister who cared for her family, and a philanthropist who wanted her passions to continue shaping the world. Her family's tears reflected gratitude as much as grief. They saw that she had thought of them in ways they had not realized. Every property she restored, every check she deposited, every contract she signed had been part of a bigger plan. They were crying because they understood that Diane Keaton had been working for them all along, even when she did not say it out loud. As her legacy lives on, both through her films and through her estate, Diane Keaton remains a model of independence. She showed that you do not need to follow Hollywood's rules to be successful. You do not need to marry to have a family. You do not need to flaunt wealth to be rich. She proved that living on your own terms can be powerful, and that a carefully built legacy can move people to tears long after you are gone. Her fortune was not just a number. It was a symbol of her love, her creativity, her independence, and her commitment to her family. The way she left it behind made her family cry because it reminded them of who she truly was. A woman who had lived boldly, planned carefully, and loved deeply. So when people look back at Diane Keaton, they will remember Annie Hall's quirky charm, Kay Adams' quiet strength, and the romantic comedy roles that made audiences laugh and cry. But her family will remember something else. They will remember the day they discovered that she had left behind not only millions, but also a message that said, "I was always thinking of you." In the end, what makes Diane Keaton's story so moving is not simply the wealth she left behind, but the quiet wisdom that shaped it. She knew that money alone could not heal grief or guarantee happiness, but it could provide stability, opportunity, and dignity for the people she loved most. By structuring her estate with care, she gave her children the tools to stand tall. She gave her siblings the comfort of security, and she gave communities a chance to thrive through her charitable choices. Her family's tears were proof that they recognized this wisdom. They were not just crying over the loss of a mother, sister, or friend. They were crying because they realized she had spent her entire life thinking about them, protecting them, and preparing them for a future without her. Diane Keaton, the actress who defied Hollywood standards and lived life on her own terms, left behind more than films and fashion. She left behind a roadmap of love, independence, and legacy. That is why her fortune mattered, not for its number, but for its meaning. Diane Keaton's story is a reminder of love, legacy, and independence. Subscribe now, share this video, and join us as we reveal more hidden truths about Hollywood's greatest stars.